Okay, yeah, I think it's time for me to shave my head again.
No,
Yes.
no,
Yes.
no.
Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to Super Kaiju Binge Episode 3, where I'll be joined by Trevor Thomson. Trevor Thomson, he has his own YouTube channel now.
Or also Trevor of Fictosphere is the nickname I put on there.
Or that. And today, me and Trev will be discussing the film to truly kick off. Well, it's debatable, but I think this is the first one that was a really huge success. The first film to really kick off the atomic monster movie craze of the 1950s, with 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. So, Trev, what's your personal history with this film?
Yeah, so I have an oddly specific, or maybe not odd, but it's specific memory regarding this. Back in third grade, we had a kite flying day that ended up being a total disaster. And so whenever I got home, I was pretty pissed and depressed about how that went. And so I was trying to take my mind off of it. And on the TV, this film was on. It was around the point where Professor Nesbitt was trying to get one of the sailors to be his other account of seeing the beast. And that's actually a pretty good point to jump into the movie, if you ask me. And shortly after that, that's whenever the beast came on shore and destroyed the lighthouse. And, you know, that's a great hook for, I think, younger viewers or viewers in general, because that's the first time things start to get real with this situation that's presented in this movie. But so anyway, that was my earliest memory of watching this, and this was one of the 3 black and white Ray Harryhausen movies that I had on tape. I didn't have Earth versus the Flying Saucers, but I did have this movie, It Came from Beneath the Sea, and 20 Million Miles to Earth.
Which, fun fact, It Came from Beneath the Sea pretty much just is a beat-for-beat copy of Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, which is probably why I wouldn't really enjoy It Came from Beneath the Sea.
Yeah, I actually really like that one, too. It seems to get dogged on by some people.
Hello. And by the way, Jackson, I think for the first time in ever one of my videos, I have coffee to drink.
Can't say I'm a coffee drinker.
I'm not either, but I just wanted something flavored.
Makes sense.
So continue.
So yeah, anyway, I wouldn't say I dig this movie, but I do like it, and it was one of my early Ray Harryhausen experiences. So not much in the history department, but there's that.
Well, not much for me either. So my history with Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which, God, that is such a, just rolls right off your tongue. Not as bad as GMK, but that title, man.
It's very 50s.
Yes, extremely. Not a bad thing, though. So, I guess I first heard about this movie through James Rolfe when he did his top 10 giant movie monsters. I think number 5 was The Beast in 20,000 Fathoms, and that was my first exposure to this film. And the movie just kind of bounced around in my view of researching giant monster movies. Because, you know, this movie does have a legacy, which is both good and bad. Bad because I don't think this movie is as good as most people give it credit for. But it wasn't until I got really interested in seeing another giant 50s monster movie. And at the time, I was really into monster movies. And there was how obsessed they were that America was in the 1950s was on my radar quite a bit. I was really researching a lot of monster movies that were being made in the 1950s, and it just what? It's only funny because it's true.
Yeah, they know that.
So I was really researching a lot of the monster movies that were being made in America in the 50s, and I'll just kind of spoil it. There was one movie that I was really looking forward to seeing, and it was the giant ant movie, Them. Spoilers, that's our next review. So I wanted to check out Them because I hadn't seen it in a very long time. So I looked on Amazon and I found a double pack that had Them and Beast for like $12. So I was like, okay, I'll slurp that up. And so I bought it and I got it, I think when I was about 13 or 14 years old. Of course, I watched Them first because that was the one that I was really looking forward to seeing. But then afterwards, I tried watching The Beast on 20,000 Fathoms. I shut it off 2/3 of the way through. And I actually kid you not, the 9th of this month is the very first time that I've seen Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from beginning to end in full. So, yeah, this movie didn't leave a huge impression on me.
Hey, you want to know a crazy date thing?
I don't.
Do I even want? Yeah, sure.
So I watched this yesterday or last night, which was October 14th, right? So during the movie, on some paperwork, I believe it's whenever he's discharged from the hospital, it's October 14th. So that was really good.
So my overall impressions from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm fond of it, but it's pretty straightforward. So there's not a whole lot you can gush about it over.
No, yeah, you're right. This movie very much so is the both prototype and also the Kickstarter of the kind of formula that 50s monster movies would have, which there were movies that did it worse, but there's also movies that did it better. Tomorrow's movie, for example, I think is the very best of that type of formula. This movie is the first of it, and it's certainly not the best, in my opinion. I don't hate this movie. I'm glad that I watched it, but I was still not overly impressed by this film. Anything you want to add before we jump into the plot?
No, I just have to say that after this recent rewatch that, again, I still like it, but I do feel that it's not quite as wow as it might have been like whenever I was younger.
Well, at the time, this movie certainly was a big hit. This movie only cost $200,000, and it was a huge success. It grossed $5 million in its box office run, which technically it was more successful than King Kong.
Yeah, and it was also it was an independent movie that Warner Brothers decided to distribute.
Oh yeah, this is a Warner Brothers movie. They bought this for $800,000, which again, back in 1953, that was a lot of money. This movie was a gargantuan success, and this is the movie that really kickstarted the atomic monster movie craze that the 50s had. Some films were better at that came on, and some films were worse. A better example, aside from the next movie, is probably The Giant Behemoth, in my opinion. And a worse example is Monster from Green Hell. Oy. So with that being said, let's get into the plot. This movie's plot is extremely simple, so this will not take long at all. Far north of the Arctic Circle, a nuclear bomb test dubbed Operation Experiment, which is such a fucking generic name. Operation Experiment is conducted, and Prophetically, right after the blast, physicist Thomas Nesbitt muses, what could the cumulative effects of all these atomic explosions and tests will be? Only time will tell. Foreshadowing, foreshadowing. The explosion then awakens a 200-foot, 61-meter-long carnivorous dinosaur known as a Rhedosaurus, thawing it out of the ice where it had been held in suspended animation for 100 million years. Nesbitt is the... Oh, well, by the way, you see the monster literally 9 minutes and 16 seconds into an 80-minute-long movie.
Albeit briefly.
Very briefly, yes. And actually, I think it's a pretty decent reveal. They reveal it via, like, you can hear the sounds of its growling, and I think those are really good sound effects.
Yes.
Nesbitt is the only surviving witness to the beast's awakening, and later is dismissed out of hand as being delirious at the time of his sighting. Despite the skepticism, he persists, knowing what he saw. The dinosaur begins making its way down the east coast of North America, sinking a fishing catch off the Grand Banks. Boy, does that sound familiar. Destroying another near Marquette, Canada, also sounding very familiar. Wrecking a lighthouse in Maine, which is a direct adaptation of the short story that this movie's based on, The Foghorn by Ray Bradbury. Though again, also sounds very, very familiar. And destroys a small fishing village off of Massachusetts. Nesbitt eventually gains allies in paleontologist Thurgood Nelson and his young assistant Lee Hunter, after one of the surviving fishermen identifies from a collection of drawings the very same dinosaur that Nesbitt saw, the Rhedosaurus. Plotting the sightings of the beast's appearance on a map for skeptical military officers, Elson proposes the dinosaur is returning to the Hudson River area where fossils of rhedosaurs were first found. In a diving bell search off the undersea Hudson River Canyon, Professor Elson is killed after his bell is swallowed by the beast, which eventually comes ashore in Manhattan and goes on a rampage, which is probably the best part of the film. A later newspaper report of its rampage lists 180 known dead. Pretty sure the body count was higher than that. 1,500 injured, and damage estimates come out to $300 million. Meanwhile, military troops led by Colonel Jack Evans attempt to stop the Rhedosaurus with an electrified barricade. God, that sounds familiar. Then blast a hole with a bazooka in the beast's throat, which drives it back into the sea. Unfortunately, it bleeds all over the streets of New York, unleashing a horrible, virulent, prehistoric contagion which begins to infect the populace, causing even more fatalities. The infection preludes blowing up the Rhedosaurus or even setting it ablaze, lest the contagion spread further. It is decided to shoot a radioactive isotope, pretty sure that's not how it would work, but whatever, 50s, into the beast's neck wound in hopes of burning it from the inside, killing it without releasing the contagion. When the Rhedosaurus comes ashore again and reaches Palisades Amusement Park, military sharpshooter Corporal Stone takes a rifle grenade loaded with a potent radioactive isotope and climbs on board a roller coaster. Riding the coaster to the top of the track so he can get to eye level with the beast, he fires the isotope into its open neck wound. It thrashes about in reaction, causing the roller coaster to spark upon falling to the ground, setting the amusement park ablaze. With the fire spreading rapidly, the park becomes engulfed in flames, and the Rhedosaurus collapses and dies from isotope poisoning and heat stroke pretty abruptly, thus ending this film. Trev?
Yeah, so what you see, or in this case heard, is what you get, pretty much.
Kind of think for worse.
What was that?
I'm all out. Kind of definitely think for the worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, because, again, after I watched this, I realized, because I wanted to have more pros than, like 4 or 5. But I just realized there wasn't a whole lot that I could say.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about this film either. So why don't you jump into your pros?
So pro number 1 is the Rhedosaurus himself, or itself. We assume he's a he. He's if he was a real creature, he would probably be the biggest carnivorous dinosaur that ever existed.
Yes.
And well, I mean, he's the creature that the movie is named after. He's a neat design. He's a bit of a prototype Godzilla.
Very.
Yeah. Although I guess you could also say, because he's a quadruped, he's kind of a mix between Godzilla and Anguirus, I suppose. That's probably pushing it a bit, but
slightly.
Yeah, he's a really neat design. Ray went back to this design again for the dragon in the 7th Voyage of Sinbad.
Haven't seen the Sinbad trilogy.
Oh, I love them. Next to Clash, they're probably my favorite Ray Harryhausen movies.
Okay, at least you didn't say Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh, that movie! I'm probably going to get some flack for this, but that movie is so overrated.
It is, yeah. It's not a bad film, but I think it's not as good as other Ray Harryhausen creature features.
My thoughts exactly, and that bears for elaboration someday. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, this guy, quote unquote, is the highlight of the movie, and I think I'll probably move up one of my pros. So pro number 2, the effects are obviously the highlight of this movie. Ray Harryhausen's first solo debut, or his first film, I should say, where he was the guy entirely in charge of the effects, and I think it is a pretty solid effort because the animation is pretty solid when it comes to stop motion animation. And like most of his creatures, there's always a little bit of character in there. Although, for the most part, the Rhedosaurus is pretty animalistic. There's definitely no significant personality that, like Godzilla, would develop later on.
Nope.
But yeah, and going back to the Rhedosaurus in general, I think he has some really good sound effects. Particularly whenever he's introduced, some really nice growls, and they sound very naturalistic. There's some 50s monsters that usually just have a very generic roar that, sometimes sounds cool, but it doesn't really sound like it would come from an actual living, breathing thing.
Yes, agreed.
So okay, that was pro 1 and 2, the Rhedosaurus and the effects that brought him to life. Pro number 3, there are a few moments of atmosphere in this movie that I do like, particularly at the start, after the bomb goes off and they're checking the checkpoints. It's actually a pretty nice atmospheric tease of something running around out there in the snow and ice.
Agreed.
So there's also, I tend to like this. This seems to be a complaint that some people have for 50s movies. Sometimes I like the semi-documentary feel that they have. Kind of dated in the way that documentaries were made back then, but there's still something kind of appealing about it because what they wanted is for you to take this as seriously as possible.
It's like a docudrama.
Yeah, docudrama. There you go. And really doing the docudrama approach is the way that they would try to make you sort of legitimize the events of whatever plot they were dealing with.
Which tons of 50s monster movies did that. They try to make the structure like a docudrama, which sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
I'd say probably It Came From Beneath the Sea might be a little bit better example.
I wouldn't really know. I still haven't seen that film.
Well, you should.
But continue.
Yeah. In any case, And there's another example of atmosphere. It's right after the Rhedosaurus attacks, and the sirens are going off, and they're also showing the fact that all the streets are guarded off. I thought that was a nice little bit of atmosphere. And also, whenever he's attacking at night, whenever he attacks the ship and then later on the lighthouse, they have a bit of atmosphere to them. So I did like that. Nothing super, super like, maybe not iconic. Well, maybe. It's kind of a in-betweenish deal where it's iconic but not like overly so. I think the original Godzilla probably has even more iconic moments.
Well, duh, yeah. There's more to that movie than this.
Well, for sure, because, this really is a prime example of showing that with American monster movies, especially from this time, there wasn't a whole lot of subtext to them. There was this attempt to generate kind of a paranoia and a fear about the possibilities, but there was no real examples of the effects of it. And that's obviously because, even though, with the Cold War and everything, there was this constant fear of what might happen if the bomb was dropped on American soil. We hadn't ever actually experienced that, but the Japanese did. So that's why Gojira probably has the amount of power, the amount of haunting effect that it does.
Yep, agreed.
And, okay, pro number 4. I did like the music for this movie. It does, if you've seen it enough times, it is kind of a memorable theme. But, again, if you're not too fond of the movie, it's probably just another one of those things that doesn't really make an impact. But, mostly the main part of the music that stands out to me is probably the opening credits or the credits, because there was no after credits. But I also used to hear that music a lot during Ray Harryhausen documentaries, so that's probably why it stuck out to me. Okay, and then pro number 5, and the last pro, is the influence. There are better examples in the genre of movies like this, but this did get the ball rolling. I think some comparisons to other movies that I can make is, so this is to the original Godzilla what I think The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price is to Night of the Living Dead. They kind of start to plant the seeds of...
That's an interesting way of looking at it, yeah.
Yeah, they start to plant the seeds of a genre that's pretty much going to blow up at some point. And, here's another one, I think. Nosferatu, 1922. I think the way that relates to the original Dracula, Bela Lugosi, I think there's a similar relationship that we could compare with this movie and Godzilla. And it's obvious that Roland Emmerich, whenever he remade Godzilla, he was thinking more of the Beast from 20,000 Pounds.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I would go so far as to say that movie is pretty much a remake of this, but they used the name Godzilla because it has more marquee value.
I was thinking that myself. I remember when I was watching Beast, when the Beast was going on a rampage, I was like, oh my God, this is just like Godzilla 1998.
Oh yeah, whenever he's going down the street and people are running away, or whenever he runs through that one building. And then also later, during the nighttime shot, whenever they're up on the roof and they try to shoot him in the skull, the way the spotlights are going over him are kind of similar to the second time they try to lure Godzilla in the 98 film.
Mm-hmm.
Also, his first attack on that fishing trawler, they upped the ante in Godzilla 98 with 3 of them, but it's pretty much the same scene.
Mm-hmm.
People don't actually see Godzilla in the 98 movie.
Well, you see his claws and his tail.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think that while Godzilla is probably the more impactful film based on the subtext of what it's trying to convey, this movie definitely has an influence, and I think that if you're somebody like Emmerich and you dismiss what the Godzilla legacy became, you could probably just kind of combine the two. It makes for a controversial, to say the least, remake, but it still obviously can be done.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are my 5 pros. I wanted to say more, but that's all I could come up with because those are the things that still stuck out to me.
Alrighty, so I have 5 pros as well. Pro number 1 is Professor Nesbit, or Nesbit, however you pronounce his name. He is the prototypical, stereotypical monster movie, B-movie protagonist, but he's definitely one of the better ones. You definitely do get attached to this guy, and you get invested in his story as the film goes on, because you kind of get wrapped up in his frustration. At least I did. I got really wrapped up in his frustration of trying to convince people, hey, there's a giant monster out there, but no one's fucking believing me. And I really admire that they could have easily just made his character just some work hand that was on this project. He wasn't a scientist. He was just like a construction guy or just some kind of assistant. But I like that they went out of their way to make him a scientist, but he looks like a typical just work hand type of character. And they acknowledge that in the movie, that you know just as well as I do that I couldn't imagine this kind of shit. I'm a scientist. Why would I make up this kind of stuff? So I thought that made his character a little more interesting. And I admired that he was really trying to go out of his way to prove that his claims were true, and he was trying to really gather up some evidence. Like, you don't really see that a whole lot in a lot of 50s monster movies, like the gathering of evidence. You don't really, them also does this too in a much better way, but like you said, this plants the seeds of future atomic monster movies, and this is the first of its kind. There were movies like this beforehand, but this is the one that, like Trev said, got the ball rolling. But yeah, I really liked his character. He was proactive. He was professional. He was just a likable character. And that kind of threw me for a loop. I was almost more invested in him than the monster story. Pro number 2 is Lee Hunter, the first stereotypical female assistant love interest character of 50s monster movies. Now, again, there were movies that did it better, but here it's definitely a very strong start. I do like that they didn't really seem to convey any kind of sexual tension between the two characters. Pardon my wife. I mean, there was concern for each other's well-being, and there may have been just a little bit of tension between the two, but I think it came off pretty natural, and their chemistry between each other is pretty good. And overall, I liked Lee Hunter as a character. She was the one to really first buy into all of Professor Nisbet's claims and try to help him gather some evidence. She was the one that stacked the giant stack of dinosaur photos for him to sort through. And she's the one who fully convinces the professor of this movie, the Elson, I think his name was, to kind of take this more seriously. So if it wasn't for Lee, they would never have found the monster, I think. Anyway, so yeah, I like those two characters. Pro number 3 is the Redosaurus itself. Like Trev said, I have the same thing. The Redosaurus, I like its design. It's definitely very distinct. It's a little generic. It's like a mix between a giant dragon and a giant dinosaur, but it is a cool mix, and it definitely is a very distinctive looking monster. I like that it's a mix of a whole lot of things. It doesn't look like any natural dinosaur in the real world, but you still look at it, and that's just like the generic image of a dinosaur. Anyway, so sorry. Honey, can you get the door? Anyway, so yeah, I like the Redosaurus's design. I like I said, it's a mix of a whole lot of different animals. I kind of actually get the general image of a tuatara, which is a rare species of lizard that lives in New Zealand. I also get a very crocodilian appearance because of its back spines and its kind of more scutish looking texture of its skin, and also the way it's a quadruped with a long tail. But also still looks very dinosaurian. I like that it's a myriad of different designs, and it makes for a very distinctive creature. My only problem with the Redosaurus is that I don't really get the sense of a personality from this thing, which is fine because this is Ray Harryhausen's first really big effort for a monster, and later on he would incorporate little personality traits into his future creatures. But here, this is just a big, giant, dumb animal, which, again, works for this film, but he's still a very generic monster. He doesn't have any special abilities. He doesn't even get to breathe fire from his mouth. He's just a giant dinosaur. So he's not super stand out-ish in the whole plethora of giant atomic age monsters that were coming out at the time. The only reason that he does stick out as much as he does is because this was the film that got the ball rolling, and this was kind of the low-key inspiration for Godzilla, which, again, isn't bad, but it's not amazing either, in my opinion. But still, I like the Redosaurus. It's a great design, worthy of its legacy, and overall, it's a pretty cool monster.
The closest real-life comparison would probably be the reconstruction of Spinosaurus. And even then, there's still some differences there.
Yeah, but I can see that. Pro number 4 is the special effects. The special effects, for their time, are very, very, very good. This was Ray Harryhausen's very first monster movie where he was completely in charge of the special effects. It shows, but mostly for the better. I definitely do agree that Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen do have very distinct differences. And I'm honestly going to go out and say that I think Ray Harryhausen was the better effects artist. Not to say that Willis O'Brien... Huh?
For sure.
Not to say that Willis O'Brien was bad, but Ray Harryhausen definitely had a lot more opportunities and time to perfect his work, whereas Willis O'Brien could never really quite catch a break after King Kong. He had some projects throughout the years, but he always kind of struggled to really get his foot in the door. Ray Harryhausen seemingly had no trouble at all.
Well, he was also a very amicable and very friendly person. Not to say that Willis wasn't, but
Willis was kind of bitter later in life, but for very understandable reasons, considering Willis O'Brien's 2 sons were murdered by their mother.
Oh, yeah, during Son of Kong. Since it's the catchphrase of this episode, we can credit Willis O'Brien with getting the ball rolling, even if he didn't perfect the art of stop-motion animation.
Yes, very much so, absolutely. So not to take anything away from Willis O'Brien, but I definitely do think Ray Harryhausen surpassed him in terms of stop-motion animation. Very much so is worthy of his legacy. So yeah, the stop-motion animation here, it's very crisp, it's very smooth. There's a couple composite shots in this movie that are a little off, like underwater when the beast swallows up a shark and an octopus. It's very obvious they just superimposed the stop-motion animation over somebody just filming a shark and an octopus fighting in a zoo tank, and that looked a little off. But overall, the special effects in this movie are pretty damn solid. There's a lot of good composite shots that look pretty decent. Of course, there's the famous eating a cop scene where there's a cop that's shooting at the beast, and the beast decides to just slowly, that's the only thing that threw me off, slowly lower its head down and just pluck the cop from the wall and just chomp it down. They executed that by lowering a crane down so that the actor could grab onto it and be lifted up, and they hid the crane with the stop motion animation, which actually I think is kind of simple and pretty clever. So yeah, overall, the effects are great. Not overly mind-blowing like the original King Kong or the original Godzilla, but the effects are great. And I think that they're definitely the highlight of this film. And the final pro that I have, pro number 5, is the monster action. It's kind of sparse in the first 2/3 of this movie, but that's just because this movie has a lot of build-up. Kind of for the worse. I'll get to that in a little bit. But the monster action, what we do see, is relatively entertaining. It's the standard giant monster on the loose scenes in a big city with people running about. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's riveting and thrilling. Not much to say, but it's not bad. It's good.
Yeah, and I also want to add, I think you kind of convinced me on Nesbitt and Lee. I mean, I like them, but whenever I was making my pros, I didn't necessarily think that I wanted to list them at first, but I think you convinced me. I would actually probably also add Professor Elson to that list too, because even though he's not in the movie much, I think he's a pretty fun and quirky character. You know, he's about to retire. He really wants to, and I think that kind of factors into the fact that he's so easy to dismiss Tom's claim. I also like that actor, Cecil Kellaway. He was in one of my favorite Mummy movies, The Mummy's Hand. So,
Wait, what?
Yeah, Professor Elson. He was in The Mummy's Hand. He was
Lampini?
Yeah, he was.
What?
Yeah, I loved him in that movie.
That's who it was.
Yeah. Yep.
Son of a bitch. Oh my God. I remember watching the movie. I was like, this guy looks and sounds familiar. Who the hell is he? Oh my God. It's the magician from The Mummy's Hand. I'll be motherfucking goddamned.
Yeah, what's funny is that it doesn't seem like he aged all that much, and that was made in 1940, and this was 53.
Damn.
Yep. I blew your mind again.
So what are your cons with the film, Trev?
All right, it's only one, and I think you're probably going to elaborate on it more specifically and break it down. But there's a bunch of 50s cliches in this. You know, Nick, you convinced me that Lee and Tom Nesbitt were actually a lot better than I at first realized, especially with Nesbitt and the thing that he was going through. But at the same time, I think most of the characters are really just there to drive the plot, which, you know, that's probably a problem with a lot of monster movies, not just ones from the 50s. Kenneth Tobey's in this movie. He's also in the original Thing and It Came From Beneath the Sea. He's the lead in those two movies, so he gets a lot more to do. Yeah, so on the note of cliches, there's a hint of it, and again, you convinced me that it's not that bad, Nick. There's a little hint of romantic tension, but thankfully it's not superimposed on the whole plot.
Nah.
You know, because it's something that, you know, I don't mind a good romance, but it seemed like it was almost on a list of requirements.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Denham said in the original King Kong. If they include romance, the movie's going to make a lot more money. So we got to include some more romance.
Yeah, exactly. Also, again, going by the 50 cliche thing, really the fact that this movie is pretty straightforward, which some people would probably consider not a bad thing, but at the same time, it doesn't give you a whole lot to talk about. They also, this happens in a lot of 50s movies. They also draw out the action, because for a lot of examples from this time period, they were either afraid of showing the monster because it didn't look good, it looked ridiculous, or the effects were subpar.
Like the giant claw.
Yeah, exactly. Or the money that they spent on it had a finite amount, and they only had so much that they could do with it. I'd say this was the case with this movie to an extent, but at the same time, again, the effects are the highlight of the movie. But really, I think maybe this speaks for itself. The cliche thing: if you're watching this and you've watched any other 50s monster movie, you're going to recognize a lot of similar beats.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the main thing that really bugged me. And again, like I said, Nick's probably going to break it down into specifics, so I'm going to let him go ahead and do that.
All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cons. Con number 1 is I was not impressed by the score. I thought it was incredibly generic, incredibly lackluster, and while there are moments where it fit what was happening on screen, I don't remember a single goddamn bit of music from the entire film. It's just generic, standard giant monster movie music, which at least it is giant monster movie music, so it's kind of like the original Gamera. But I even think the music for the original Gamera is more memorable than this movie. So yeah, I was not impressed by the score.
Well, it's like I was saying, it's mainly the main theme, the bum 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 bum. And again, that's only if you've seen it more than once. It eventually sticks out to you, at least in my opinion.
Con number 2 is that this movie I don't think is paced very well. Now, some of it is fine, like with watching Nesbitt and Hunter gather evidence to try to convince the authorities that there's a giant monster on the loose. But even aside from that, the first 2 acts of this movie are kind of slow. And this will lead into my next problem with this movie. Con number 3 is that the ending is very anticlimactic. The first 2 acts are pretty slow, and then the third act shows up with the monster's rampage, and it kind of just seems like they were rushing to get through it and then just end the movie literally with the bang, and then that's it. It was a little jarring, and I felt like there could have been a little bit more done with the third act of this movie. They had potentially all this good buildup in the first 2 acts, but then it just kind of duds in the third act with the monster's rampage. Now, it's a fun rampage, and the third act of the movie is still entertaining, but I still feel like much more could have been done with it. Con number 4 is this is my only issue. My other only issue with the effects, and this has to do with the Rhedosaurus. I feel like there were some inconsistent size moments with the monster. Like there's parts where the monster looks huge, and then there's other parts where the monster looks a lot smaller than 200 feet. I can't really point out any specific, and there's also other moments where the thing looks gigantic, like even larger than 200 feet. Like at the very end, when it's tearing apart the carnival, it looks like it's 300 or 400 feet long. But then there's that scene where the monster just plows its way through a building where it looks like it's maybe 50 to 100 feet long. It could have been just me kind of taking things out of context, but I definitely could feel like there were some inconsistencies with the monster's size throughout the film. I could be wrong, but that's just what I felt.
It was probably a staging and framing issue.
Maybe so. Con number 5 is, my God, is this movie, aside from Hunter and Nesbitt, my God, is this movie's cast generic. Good Lord Almighty, is this movie's cast generic as all living shit. No character sticks out. It's like Trev said, the cast is here just to move the plot along. There's not much character, there's not much depth. They're just constructs to move the plot along, which again is very, very reminiscent of this movie being a docudrama. But I think that's always been one of the biggest problems with the docudrama genre is that their characters are kind of flat as a plateau. Look at the original Varan the Unbelievable, for example. That movie is very much like a docudrama, and the characters are flat as a plateau in that film. Especially Korea Senda. So yeah, not much to say about that. Just the characters are flat. They're not terribly acted, but their characters are just flat. Con number 6 is the disease twist. I really feel like the disease twist with the ancient prehistoric contagion that the beast releases when it's injured, I feel like it just comes right out of butt the fuck nowhere, and it's only there to create some extra tension at the very last minute to give the threat even more threat. And I don't think it was pulled off very well. It's literally only in the last 10 minutes of the movie, and I feel like that was just a big excuse for the movie to just end right then and there.
Last minute escalation of stakes.
There you go. That's exactly what it is. Not for the better. And my final con with this movie, con number, did I say 7 or 6?
7.
7. This movie's way too short. There's a lot of potential that they could have done with this movie if they had a bigger budget, like at least a $300,000 budget. This movie could have easily been another 15 minutes longer. But at a mere 80-minute runtime, no. It's just under 80 minutes. I think this movie is way too short. And it's strange because this movie has such imbalanced pacing, but at that same time, it really suffers from being too short, in my opinion. That's really all I have to say about this movie. Trev, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that if you're a young fan getting into monster movies, you'll probably eat this up because if you're a young fan, you know, whenever you start out, you're wanting to consume as much monster stuff as possible. And I know I used to feel that way, especially whenever I was getting into Ray Harryhausen. And I think that factored into my positive feelings for the movie. And I still like it, but unfortunately, after this last viewing, I have to admit that it is just a little too straightforward for its own good. I mean, what is good about it is good, mainly the Rhedosaurus himself, and a couple of character beats that are interesting and are a little bit different than what you see in most movies from this era. But still, unfortunately, when it comes down to it, I just didn't have a whole lot to say about it. And I think the main difference between this and the original Gojira is the fact that there's a different cultural attitude going on here where one is just entertainment that is supposed to invoke feelings of thrill and maybe some paranoia. And then on the other hand, with Gojira, we have something that's commentating on an experience that is really wholly unique to the Japanese culture. So that's probably why Godzilla or Gojira has stood the test of time, I guess you'd say, and this, despite planting the seeds, kind of falls by the wayside, even though it still had influence later on, specifically for the first American version of Godzilla, which is ironic because it's going back to the roots in a sense.
So my final thoughts on The Beast in 20,000 Fathoms, it's not a bad movie, and I do appreciate the film for what it is, and I do think it deserves the legacy that it has. And I think it should go down in history as an important step in the kaiju genre. But kind of like with the original King Kong, there's just way more movies out there that I like way more than this. So my final rating for The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms will be a 5.5 out of 10. That may sound a little low for some people, but that's just how I feel. But I definitely do recommend you check it out if you are just a huge fan of giant monster movies, and especially if you want to get through a little more obscure older classics. I definitely do recommend you check this film out. It's the progenitor of the 50s monster movie genre. And tomorrow, join me and Trev. What's your final rating?
Oh, my final rating's probably going to be a 6.
Fair. Join me and Trev tomorrow as we get into, in my opinion, the very best of the 50s giant monster movie formula can offer. The most well-executed, the most entertaining, and just the overall best. With 1954's giant atomic ant monster movie, Them.
We're going to have a lot to say about that one.
Oh, yes. Trev, got anything to plug?
Yeah, so like Nick mentioned at the start of the video, I have my own YouTube channel now. It's listed under Trevor Thomson. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of other other people out there with my name, particularly a spiritual singer. But if you type in Trevor of Fictosphere, because that's the nickname that I put in there, you'll find all the videos I've appeared in, not just the first one on my channel, but also ones from the Fictosphere channel, their YouTube channel. And we also have the theme for this month on Fictosphere is that we're going to be talking about the Universal monsters. We haven't really got going yet, unlike Kongtober, which we put a lot of effort into, but there's still going to be some content coming, so look out for that.
Alrighty, look forward to more episodes of Super Kaiju Binge, and go join Jackson I Productions Official. That is the name of my new Facebook group for my YouTube channel. I'll probably try to put a link to that in the description below. If I can figure that out. And go join that group. You can post your videos. You can post discussion topics of your favorite films, shows, any kind of entertainment media that you are a fan of, including My Little Pony. Whatever you want. No strings attached, just free promotion. Just don't be a spammer and don't be a troll. So go join that, and look forward to more episodes of Super Kaiju Binge. And as always, if you're going to go to the North Pole, man, there's a lot of things you got to look out for in the North Pole. You got the Thing from Another World and the Beast in 20,000 Fathoms. Just go with the bazooka. It'll make things much more easier. Go check out Trev's stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video.